So here are the results of my remove ingredient test. But I had an extra little part of this that I did. I just fired all 5 components individually, just for reference. So here we can see this is Custer feldspar. Started out as a white powder, and now it's kind of a glassy and turned a little bit brown. Next up is wollastonite. Wollastonite stayed white, and it's not quite glassy, but it definitely has set up. It's a little bit harder. I could probably grind it down into a powder again, but that was an interesting result. Then we had what was next? The silica, the flint, and my flint source. Yeah, it didn't really do much. It stayed pretty powdery. Set up a little bit, but not a whole lot. Not too unexpected. EPK. Now, essentially, I just sort of calcined some EPK. So the fact that it will now crumble back down, not too surprising. And finally, my Frit 3134 totally melted. It's glass. So no big surprise there. The whole purpose of the flint is to make the glaze melt better. So the fact that the Frit all by itself just melted right down into a nice but kind of crackly and unstable glass, not too surprising. I also have my cones back here. You can see that my 5 cone is totally down. It's flopped completely. My 6 cone came over and is just touching the surface, and my 7 cone had just started to bend. So it looks like my firing program was pretty good. My kiln behaved for me. On to the glaze tests themselves. I just did 2 sets. I did one where I did the plain 5x20 glaze, and I did one where I mixed the exact same thing up, but then added a colorant. So I just did it as 2 separate batches. The colorant I added is a cobalt source. It's not a typical cobalt source. It's just one I had around. So looking at these, they're about cool enough that I can pick them up now. There's my standard 5x20 glaze. Looks about like 5x20 glaze. You can see it's got a nice bit of a drip coming off the side, but not too bad. Similarly with the cobalt, cobalt looks like it might have made it just a tiny bit drippier. But again, that's not a bad looking glaze. That's pretty good. Looks like there may have been a little bit of surface problem in here, and maybe a little bit of an inclusion, but not too bad. Moving on to the removals, removing Custer feldspar. So this is removing a primary flux. Looking at the 5x20 untinted, uncolored glaze, I don't notice a big difference just in looking at the surface, but you see there's not as much drip off the side, so it looks like it ran less. Not too surprised with removing a flux, removing a primary flux. Again, looking at the tinted version of this, the cobalt version of this, glaze looks pretty reasonable. This one sure looks like it's got bigger drips than the plain glaze did. So again, that makes me think that my particular cobalt source may be acting a little bit more like a flux than some others. It's only in there at 1%, so it shouldn't be a huge effect, but obviously there's some change. Next up, we've got no wollastonite, and this one's quite different. This one is pretty matte. It looks chunky. It looks curdled on the surface. Not really any drip. And this is one that I did a straight dip and then a diagonal dip, and you can see that diagonal line, but again, very matte glaze, very pebbly looking surface, not a great glaze. With my cobalt colorant in there, it's a little bit less matte with the cobalt, but it's still pretty chunky, pretty pebbly looking. Not a super good glaze at all. Next, we remove the silica. Now this one, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little surprised that this one looks as good as it does. Nice, pretty shiny. The surface looks reasonable. If you look at the drip lines down the side, it's got a little bit of drip, so you can see that there's a little bit less stability to flow. That makes sense with the silica. And again, the cobalt tinted version has some good drips on it. Some of that might just be the drips are easier to see because they're cobalt. But that's that one. Now, removing EPK. This one surprised me. First of all, we look at it, and it is a bit matte. So not great. Doesn't look like it had a ton of run to it, but it did cool down a little bit. But this one is so white, and I didn't expect that one of them would just magically turn white. But interesting result in seeing that white glaze come out of the clear batch. And similarly with the cobalt colorant in there, it's definitely very white, much more opaque. I guess it may not be white formally, it may be more opaque, but you can see the blue color coming out a little bit. Again, pretty similar. And the last one was without frit. And this one doesn't look great. It's a little pebbly. You can see it looks kind of curdled and chunky on the surface. Not a beautiful glaze. Not at all. Looking at the cobalt tinted version of that, this one has a little bit more of that opacity, a little bit more whiteness than some of the others, but again, looks kind of meh. Not real happy with that one. But that was sort of the whole point of the experiment. So there we go. That is how my remove an ingredient experiment turned out, with a little bit of extra bonus firing as well. Thanks for watching.